Admiral Vex High stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the planet Earth grow larger on the main screen. The blue and green world looked peaceful from space, with white clouds dancing across its surface. It was hard to believe that such a small, primitive planet could cause so much trouble for the great Zephyrian Empire. The Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They were masters of space, with technology that could destroy entire worlds and fleets that numbered in the millions. When they wanted something, they took it. When someone said no, they made an example of them. It was a simple system that worked perfectly, until now. These humans had done something no species had ever done before. When the Empire demanded mining rights to their asteroid belt, they had said no. Not just their government or their military leaders. The entire species had voted on it and said no. They claimed the asteroids were part of their solar system heritage and could not be sold. The Empire found this amusing. Heritage? These humans had only been in space for less than 200 years. The Zephyrians had been traveling between stars since before human civilization existed. What could these newcomers possibly understand about galactic law and order? Admiral Vex High had seen this pattern hundreds of times before. A young species would discover space travel and think they were special. They would refuse reasonable demands from their betters. Then the Empire would demonstrate their power, and the young species would learn their place in the galaxy. Target the city they call New Geneva, the Admiral ordered his weapons officer. Population approximately 4 million. Use the plasma cannon, full power. Make sure the crater will be visible from their moon. The weapons officer, a tall Zephyrian with silver skin that glowed softly in the bridge lights, nodded. Target locked, Admiral. Shall I broadcast the standard warning first? Admiral Vex High considered this. The warning usually gave primitive species a chance to surrender before the demonstration. But these humans had been particularly stubborn. Their leaders had actually laughed when the Empire first made their demands. They had sent back a message saying that no alien species would ever dictate terms to humanity on their own home system. Such arrogance needed a stronger lesson. No warning, the Admiral decided. Fire when ready. The plasma cannon charged with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. On the main screen, Admiral Vex High could see the lights of New Geneva twinkling on the night side of the planet. In a few seconds, those lights would become a brief sun, then nothing at all. Firing, announced the weapons officer. The beam lanced down from space, invisible until it hit the planet's atmosphere. Then it became a pillar of white fire that lasted for exactly 3 seconds. When it faded, where New Geneva had been, there was only a glowing crater 20 kilometers wide. 4 million humans had just died in the time it took Admiral Vex High to blink. The Admiral waited. This was always the interesting part. How would the humans react? Would they send desperate messages begging for mercy? Would they immediately surrender and offer tribute? Would their leaders fight each other over who was to blame for bringing this disaster on their people? Minutes passed. Then hours. The human communication networks remained active, but they sent no messages to the Zephyrian fleet. No pleas for peace. No offers of surrender. No threats of revenge. Nothing at all. Admiral, his communication officer reported, we're receiving standard civilian traffic from the planet. Ship schedules, weather reports, news broadcasts, but no official government response to our demonstration. This was unusual. Admiral Vex High frowned, his silver features darkening. Are they in shock? Sometimes primitive species need time to understand what has happened to them. Perhaps, sir. But their military bases are still active. Their space defenses are still online. Their fleet movements show no change in pattern. The Admiral studied the tactical display. The humans had a modest space force. Perhaps 300 ships total. Most of them were converted civilian vessels with basic weapons. Nothing that could threaten even a single Zephyrian cruiser, let alone an entire fleet. But they were continuing their normal patrol routes as if nothing had happened. Sir, the sensor officer called out, we're detecting increased activity around their shipyards. Multiple construction projects, starting simultaneously. What kind of construction? Unclear, Admiral. The energy signatures suggest they're building ships, but the designs don't match any known human military vessels. Admiral Vex High felt the first small stirring of unease. In his long career, he had never encountered a species that responded to orbital bombardment by starting construction projects. Usually they were too busy screaming. Days passed. Then weeks. The humans continued their daily lives as if their world had not just been attacked by an alien empire. Their news broadcasts mentioned the destruction of New Geneva, of course. They held memorial services for the dead. They rebuilt refugee camps for the survivors, but they made no attempt to contact the Zephyrian fleet that still orbited their world. It was as if they were ignoring the Empire entirely. This began to worry Admiral Vex High's crew. The Zephyrians were used to being feared. Their very appearance in a star system usually caused panic among primitive species. But these humans seemed to have dismissed them as irrelevant. After 3 months of waiting, Admiral Vex High finally received new orders from the Empire's High Command. The Emperor was curious about this strange human behavior and wanted a full report. Other conquered species were asking questions about why the humans had not surrendered. Some were even suggesting that perhaps the Empire was not as powerful as it claimed. This could not be allowed to continue. Then, just as Admiral Vex High was preparing to destroy another human city, something unexpected happened. The humans finally sent a message to the Zephyrian fleet, but it was not what anyone expected. "Greetings, Admiral Vex High," the message began. It came from an elderly human woman with silver hair and calm eyes. "My name is Elena Vasquez, and I represent the Human Coalition government. We would like to request a meeting with your High Command. We have a statement to make regarding recent events." The Admiral stared at the message. A statement? Not a surrender, not a plea for mercy. But a statement? "We will send a small diplomatic vessel to your capital world," the human woman continued. "We expect safe passage and the opportunity to address your leadership directly. This meeting will be brief. We have only one thing to say." The message ended there. Admiral Vex High forwarded the request to his superiors, along with his recommendation that they accept. He was curious now about what these strange humans thought they could possibly say to the masters of the galaxy. Within days, approval came back from the High Command. The humans would be allowed to make their statement. It would be educational for the other species to watch another primitive civilization accept its place in the galactic order. But as Admiral Vex High watched the small human ship depart for the Empire's capital, he could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong with this situation. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that waited 3 months to surrender, then asked for a meeting to make a statement. What could these humans possibly have to say? The capital world of the Zephyrian Empire was a sight that had impressed countless species over the millennia. Massive crystal towers reached toward the sky, each one larger than most cities. Ships from 100 different worlds filled the orbital space, bringing tribute and resources to the Empire's heart. The palace itself was built inside a mountain that had been carved into the shape of a perfect sphere. Its surface covered in mirrors that reflected the light of 3 suns. High Admiral Zephyron, Supreme Commander of the Empire's military forces, stood in the Great Council chamber waiting for the human delegation to arrive. The chamber was enormous, with walls made of transparent crystal that looked out over the capital city. Representatives from dozens of member species filled the viewing galleries, eager to watch this unusual diplomatic meeting. The Korthak delegation clicked their mandibles in amusement, their insect-like bodies shifting restlessly. The silicon-based Vexmore pulsed with colors that their species used for laughter. Even the normally serious Altarian observers seemed entertained by the idea of humans attempting diplomacy with the Empire. "This should be interesting," commented Admiral Vex High, who had traveled from Earth to witness the meeting. "I have never seen a species wait so long to surrender." High Admiral Zephyran nodded, his crystalline features glowing with satisfaction. "They are probably planning some elaborate ceremony to make their submission seem dignified. Primitive species often do this to save face before their own people." The great doors of the chamber opened, and the human delegation entered. 3 people walked across the vast floor toward the speaking area at the center of the room. They wore simple, dark clothing with no decorations or weapons. No honor guards accompanied them. No ceremonial items or gifts for the Empire. The lead figure was an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat style. Her face showed age and experience, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Behind her walked a middle-aged man with kind features and a younger woman carrying a plain briefcase. The watching aliens murmured among themselves. This was not the usual display they expected from a surrendering species. Where were the golden robes? The ceremonial weapons? The desperate attempts to appear important? High Admiral Zephyran studied the humans with growing disappointment. They looked so ordinary, like shopkeepers or teachers, not representatives of an entire world. It was almost insulting that such unremarkable beings had required so much of the Empire's attention. The elderly woman stepped forward to the speaking stone at the center of the chamber. Her voice carried clearly through the perfect acoustics of the crystal dome, reaching every corner of the vast space. "Honorable members of the Zephyrian Empire," she began. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I serve as ambassador for the Human Coalition. We thank you for granting us this audience." Her tone was polite but not desperate. She spoke like someone conducting normal business, not someone whose world had just been attacked by an overwhelming alien force. "We have come here today not to surrender," she continued, and a stir went through the watching crowd. "We have not come to negotiate, nor to beg for mercy. We have come to deliver a single message to your leadership and to all the species represented here today." High Admiral Zephyran felt a flicker of annoyance. The human was not following proper protocol. Conquered species were supposed to begin with acknowledgement of the Empire's superiority and expressions of regret for their previous defiance. "Human," he interrupted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You seem to misunderstand your situation. Your world has been demonstrated the consequences of defying imperial authority. 4 million of your people died because your leaders chose pride over wisdom. You are here to accept the terms of your submission. Nothing more." Ambassador Vasquez turned to face him directly. Her expression remained calm, almost friendly, as if she were having a pleasant conversation with an old acquaintance. "With respect, High Admiral, you are the one who misunderstands the situation," she replied. 3 months ago, you attacked our home. You killed 4 million of our people to make a point about mining rights to some asteroids. She paused, letting her words settle in the crystal chamber. "But you see, there's something fundamental about humanity that your intelligence gathering seems to have missed. Something that makes us different from the other species you've conquered." The High Admiral's glow brightened with impatience. "Human, your species controls perhaps a dozen star systems, your largest fleet numbers in the hundreds. Your technology is centuries behind our own. You have no weapons capable of threatening our installations, no alliances that could challenge our power. What could you possibly possess that would make you different from any other primitive species?" Ambassador Vasquez smiled then, and something in that expression made several of the alien observers shift uncomfortably. "You're absolutely correct about our limitations," she agreed. "We can't match your firepower. We don't have your numbers or your advanced technology. In a conventional war, we would lose quickly and completely." She opened the briefcase and withdrew a simple data pad, placing it on the speaking stone between them. "But you've made a critical error in your assessment of humanity. You've been monitoring our military assets, our government installations, our colonial defenses. You've cataloged our weapons and counted our ships. You've analyzed our industrial capacity and mapped our supply lines." The High Admiral frowned, his crystal features dimming slightly. "Of course we have. Standard intelligence gathering before any conquest. What is your point?" "Flend." "The point," Ambassador Vasquez said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "is that while you were watching our governments and our militaries, you completely ignored our civilians." "Civilians are irrelevant in warfare," the High Admiral stated dismissively. "They are simply resources to be managed once conquest is complete." Ambassador Vasquez's smile disappeared entirely. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly why you're going to lose this war." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. No conquered species had ever threatened the Empire during a surrender ceremony. The watching delegates leaned forward in their viewing galleries, suddenly much more interested in the proceedings. "You think of civilians as irrelevant," the human woman continued, her voice growing stronger. But you've never encountered a species where every civilian is a potential soldier, where every merchant ship captain is willing to become a warrior, where every parent will fight to the death to protect not just their own children, but the idea of home itself. She gestured to the datapad on the speaking stone. You attacked our home. Not just a city, not just a military base, but our home. Every human in the galaxy now knows that you are willing to murder millions of innocent people to make a political point. And that changes everything. High Admiral Zephyron stared at the small human woman standing before the might of the Galactic Empire. You cannot be threatening us. Your entire species combined could not damage a single one of our battle stations. We're not threatening you, Ambassador Vasquez replied calmly. We're informing you. You wanted to send a message with the destruction of New Geneva. Consider your message received. But now we have a message for you. She picked up the datapad and held it toward the crystal ceiling where light from the three suns streamed through. You've awakened something that has been sleeping in human space for the past 3 months. While you've been waiting for our surrender, 4 billion humans have been asking themselves the same question. If you're willing to murder 4 million innocent people for some asteroids, what will you do when you decide you want our worlds? The chamber was completely silent now. The answer they've reached, she continued, is that we're already at war. We just didn't know it until you attacked our home. Ambassador Vasquez placed the datapad back on the speaking stone and stepped away from it. That's our message, High Admiral. We wanted to make sure you understood what you've started before it's too late to change course. Because in about 6 hours, you're going to discover what happens when you convince an entire species that their only choice is to fight or die. She turned and walked toward the exit, her 2 companions following. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the assembled aliens. Oh, and High Admiral? You might want to check on your patrol stations. I believe they should be receiving visitors very soon. The 3 humans left the chamber, leaving behind a room full of confused and increasingly worried aliens. High Admiral Zephyron stared at the datapad on the speaking stone for a long moment, then activated his personal communicator to contact Fleet Command. Something told him he was going to need it. High Admiral Zephyron stared at the datapad the human woman had left behind, then looked up at the viewing galleries where representatives from dozens of species watched him with obvious curiosity. The humans had just done something unprecedented in the 3,000-year history of the Empire. They had threatened the Zephyrians during what should have been a surrender ceremony. The Admiral's crystalline features began to glow brighter with anger. How dare these primitive creatures attempt to intimidate an empire that ruled half the galaxy? Their entire civilization was younger than some of the Empire's individual space stations. Their most advanced weapons were toys compared to Zephyrian technology. Admiral, his communication officer's voice came through his personal device. We have urgent reports from multiple sectors. Several patrol stations are reporting contact with unknown vessels. The Admiral's glow dimmed slightly. The human woman had mentioned something about patrol stations receiving visitors. Could these primitives actually be attempting some kind of attack? What kind of vessels? He asked. The reports are confused, sir. The ships appear to be civilian craft. Freighters, mining vessels, passenger transports. But they're not responding to our signals, and they're approaching our installations at attack speed. High Admiral Zephyron felt a moment of bewilderment. Civilian ships attacking military installations? It made no sense. Even the most desperate species had never tried something so obviously suicidal. He activated the main communication system to address all the representatives in the viewing galleries. If these humans wanted to embarrass themselves with a futile gesture, they could at least make it educational for the other species. Citizens of the Empire, he announced, his voice carrying the absolute confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. It appears the humans are attempting some kind of demonstration. We will observe their efforts and learn from their failure. The main display screens around the chamber activated, showing feed from patrol stations throughout the Empire. The assembled representatives leaned forward to watch what promised to be a brief and one-sided engagement. In the Kelthar system, Patrol Station Omega-7 detected 3 approaching vessels. The station commander, a veteran Zephyrian officer named Sub-Admiral Keltar, studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. Sir, his tactical officer reported, The lead ship appears to be a human cargo hauler, approximately 50 years old. Its hull shows extensive wear from civilian use. No military modifications visible. "What's its armament?" the sub-admiral asked. "None that we can detect, sir." Standard civilian sensor array, basic communication equipment. No weapons, no shields, no armor plating. Sub-Admiral Keltar frowned. "Then why is it approaching at attack speed?" "Signal them to halt and prepare for inspection. We've been trying to signal them for the past 10 minutes, sir." No response. "They're maintaining course and speed directly toward our station." The sub-admiral watched the ancient freighter grow larger on his screen. Behind it, 2 more human vessels followed the same trajectory. Neither appeared to be military ships. One looked like a passenger transport that might carry families between human colonies. The other seemed to be some kind of research vessel. "Sir," the tactical officer said, his voice becoming uncertain, "I'm detecting massive energy buildup in all 3 ships." "From what?" "They don't have any weapons systems." "Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match any known weapon types. It's almost like they're overloading their own power systems." Sub-Admiral Keltar felt the first stirring of real alarm. All defensive systems online. Prepare to fire warning shots. But before his weapons could charge, the lead human ship suddenly accelerated far beyond what its civilian engines should have been capable of. The energy readings spiked to levels that made no sense, and the sub-admiral realized with horror what he was seeing. The humans had turned their cargo ship into a guided missile. "Full defensive fire," he shouted, but it was too late. The freighter slammed into Patrol Station Omega-7 at a significant fraction of light speed, its overloaded reactor detonating on impact. The explosion vaporized both the ship and a large section of the station's hull. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the remaining sections as atmosphere rushed out into space. Before the crew could fully process what had happened, the second ship arrived. The passenger transport had been gutted and filled with some kind of industrial explosive that turned the entire vessel into a bomb. It struck the station's main power core, and Patrol Station Omega-7 died in a brilliant flash of light. The third ship never reached its target. The station's destruction had sent debris flying in all directions, and the research vessel was destroyed by a chunk of twisted metal the size of a building. But Sub-Admiral Keltar and his entire crew were already dead, so they never saw it. Back in the council chamber on the capital world, High Admiral Zephyran watched the destruction of Omega-7 with disbelief. The humans had just sacrificed 3 civilian ships, and everyone aboard them to destroy a single patrol station. It was madness. "Sir," his communication officer called out urgently, "we're receiving similar reports from 17 different systems. Human civilian vessels are attacking our installations throughout the outer territories." "Civilian vessels," the admiral repeated, as if saying the words might make them make sense. "They're using cargo ships and passenger transports as weapons." "Yes, sir. And, sir, they're all volunteers." The admiral turned sharply toward his officer. "What do you mean, volunteers?" "The ships are broadcasting messages as they approach our stations. Final words from their crews. They're saying goodbye to their families." "Sir, these aren't military personnel following orders. They're ordinary citizens who chose to die attacking us." On the main display, more patrol stations died in brilliant explosions. Each attack was the same. Aging civilian ships, overloaded reactors, crews who knew they would not survive. But the humans kept coming anyway. The watching alien representatives began murmuring among themselves. The Korthak delegation was no longer clicking with amusement. The Vexmore had stopped their color shifting entirely. Even the Altarians looked disturbed by what they were witnessing. "This is impossible," High Admiral Zephyran stated firmly. "No species sacrifices civilians in suicide attacks. Civilians are non-combatants. They're protected by galactic law. They don't participate in warfare." But even as he spoke, the reports continued coming in. Human merchants, farmers, teachers, retired engineers, entire families, all climbing into ships they had converted into weapons and flying them into Empire installations, while broadcasting messages of love and determination to people they would never see again. Admiral Vex High, watching from his position near the command center, felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of military service. Fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but fear of something far more terrifying. He was afraid of fighting an enemy that considered death preferable to surrender. "Sir." The communication officer's voice was becoming strained. "The humans appear to be coordinating these attacks. Every ship is hitting us at exactly the same time across multiple sectors. This isn't random desperation. It's organized." "Organized by whom?" the Admiral demanded. "Their military command? Their government?" "Unknown, sir. But the pattern suggests widespread civilian participation. We estimate several hundred ships involved so far. Several hundred civilian ships, all converted to weapons, all crewed by volunteers who knew they would die." The Admiral tried to process this information and failed. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Empire had never encountered anything like it. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're receiving a broadcast on all frequencies from human space. Put it through." The voice that filled the chamber was not that of a government official or military commander. It was a middle-aged human man speaking in a calm, conversational tone. "Hello. My name is David Chen. I'm a cargo pilot. Been flying freight runs between Earth and the colonies for 23 years. Got a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage on a house in New Shanghai." The Admiral frowned. Why was this civilian's personal information being broadcast to the Empire? "I want you to know," the human continued, "that I volunteered for this mission. Nobody ordered me to do this. Nobody forced me. I'm doing this because you murdered 4 million people in New Geneva, including my sister and her family." There was a pause, and when the human spoke again, his voice was harder. "I'm flying a cargo ship full of mining charges straight at your supply depot in the Ross system. My ship might be old and slow, but these explosives are brand new. I just wanted you to know that when I die in about 30 seconds, it's because you taught me that you're willing to kill innocent people to make a point." Another pause. "Well, here's my point." The transmission ended in static. High Admiral Zephyron stood in his crystal chamber, surrounded by the shocked representatives of dozens of species. And for the first time in his long military career, he had no idea what to do. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were teaching the Empire what the word home really meant. 3 weeks had passed since the first human civilian ships had converted themselves into weapons, and Admiral Vexhai was beginning to understand that the Empire faced something far more dangerous than a military rebellion. He stood in the situation room of his command ship, studying reports that made less sense each day. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "the human attacks have entered what appears to be a second phase. They're no longer just using suicide ships." Admiral Vexhai looked up from the tactical display showing the locations of destroyed Empire installations. In 3 weeks, the humans had eliminated over 60 patrol stations, supply depots, and minor military bases. Each attack had cost them a civilian ship and everyone aboard. But they never seemed to run out of volunteers. "What do you mean, second phase?" "They're getting creative, sir. Yesterday, a human freighter crew pretended to be delivering medical supplies to the orbital hospital above Centauri 7. When they were given permission to dock, they revealed that their cargo bay was full of reprogrammed mining robots. Mining robots? Each one had been fitted with demolition charges and programmed to spread throughout the station before detonating. The crew had also modified themselves. Admiral Vexhai felt his silver skin grow cold. Modified themselves how? They had surgically implanted remote triggers linked to their heartbeats, sir. If anyone tried to stop them by force, their deaths would automatically detonate the robots. The station commander had no choice but to evacuate, while the humans calmly placed additional explosives throughout the facility. The Admiral stared at his officer. "They turned themselves into deadman switches?" "Yes, sir." "Then, they triggered the explosives manually once the evacuation was complete and died with their ship." "But sir, that's not the worst part. What could be worse than that? Before they died, they sent a message to the evacuated station crew. They apologized for the inconvenience and hoped that no Empire personnel had been seriously injured in the evacuation. Then they wished them luck finding new jobs. Admiral HFY sat down heavily. The humans had just destroyed a major military installation, killed themselves in the process, and then apologized for any inconvenience to their enemies. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're receiving reports from the Altarian sector. The humans appear to have infiltrated one of our diplomatic conferences." "How does one infiltrate a diplomatic conference with suicide bombers?" "They didn't use bombs, sir. They used words." The Admiral's confusion was growing by the minute. "Explain." "A human delegation requested permission to address the conference about trade regulations. They were granted 5 minutes to speak. Instead of talking about trade, they presented a detailed analysis of every Empire military action for the past 50 years. So, they proved that the Empire has a pattern of using overwhelming force against civilian targets to intimidate entire species into submission. Then they asked the assembled delegates a simple question. If the Empire is willing to murder 4 million humans for some asteroids, what happens when they decide they want something your species possesses?" Admiral HFY felt a chill run through his crystalline structure. What was the response? 3 species withdrew from the conference immediately. 5 more requested private meetings with the human delegation. The Altarian ambassador officially protested the Empire's methods and demanded an investigation into civilian casualties. The humans turned a diplomatic conference into a recruitment session. The Admiral said slowly, "It appears so, sir. But there's more. Our deep space reconnaissance has detected unusual activity in human territory." "What kind of activity?" "Construction, sir. Massive construction projects in every human system. They appear to be building ships, but not following any known human design patterns." Admiral HFY activated the main display and studied the intelligence reports. Human space, which had been relatively quiet for decades, was now buzzing with activity. Asteroid mining operations that had been dormant for years were suddenly working around the clock. Civilian shipyards that normally produced cargo haulers were now building something else entirely. "What are they building?" "Unknown, sir. The energy signatures suggest ship construction, but the designs don't match any human military vessels in our database. They're larger than anything humans have built before, but they don't appear to be warships." "How many ships?" "Current estimates suggest several thousand under construction simultaneously across 12 different systems." Admiral HFY stared at the numbers. Several thousand ships would represent the largest construction project in human history. Where had they found the resources? The workers? The materials? "Sir," his communication officer interrupted, "we're receiving a priority message from High Command. The Emperor wants a full briefing on the human situation." The Admiral nodded grimly. He was not looking forward to that conversation. How did one explain to the Emperor of the Galaxy that a primitive species was somehow winning a war using cargo ships and mining robots? His thoughts were interrupted by an urgent alert from the sensor station. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts approaching our position. Human vessels, but they're not behaving like the previous suicide ships." "How many vessels?" 17 ships, sir. They appear to be a mix of freighters and passenger transports, but they're maintaining formation and responding to our signals." "Are they requesting permission to surrender?" "No, sir. They're requesting permission to conduct a salvage operation." Admiral HFY blinked. "A salvage operation?" "Yes, sir. They claim there are valuable materials floating in this system that they would like to collect." The Admiral looked at his tactical display. His fleet was currently positioned near the remains of a human cargo convoy they had destroyed 2 days earlier. The wreckage was still drifting through space, scattered across several million cubic kilometers. "They want to salvage their own destroyed ships?" "Apparently so, sir. They're offering to pay standard salvage fees for the privilege." This was a new level of strangeness, even for the humans. Admiral HFY considered his options. The wreckage posed no threat to his fleet, and salvage operations were a normal part of space commerce. There seemed to be no reason to refuse. "Grant them permission, but maintain full tactical alert. I want to know what they're really after." "Yes, sir." The human ship spread out through the debris field and began their work. Admiral HFY watched through his ship's sensors as small craft emerged from the freighters and began collecting pieces of wreckage. It looked like exactly what it claimed to be, a routine salvage operation. Then his intelligence officer made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the wreckage they're collecting. It's not random debris." "What do you mean?" "They're specifically targeting damaged computer systems, weapons components, and armor plating. All Empire technology that was installed on their ships when we destroyed them." Understanding dawned on Admiral Vexhai like a cold sunrise. "They're learning from our attacks." "Yes, sir. Every ship we destroy gives them more information about our weapons, our tactics, and our technology. They're using the wreckage to improve their own capabilities. And we've been letting them collect it because salvage operations are legal under galactic law." "Exactly, sir." Admiral Vexhai watched the human salvage ships continue their work with growing admiration and horror. These people had turned even their defeats into victories. They were learning from every attack, adapting to every tactic, and growing stronger with each encounter. "Sir," his communication officer called out urgently, "the human salvage operation leader is requesting permission to send a message to our fleet." "What kind of message?" "He says it's a personal thank you note." Despite everything, Admiral Vexhai found himself curious. "Put it through." "Put it through." A middle-aged human woman appeared on the main screen. She was wearing a salvage operator's suit and floating in zero gravity inside what appeared to be the cargo bay of her ship. "Admiral Vexhai," she said with a friendly smile, "my name is Captain Sarah Martinez. I wanted to thank you personally for leaving all this wonderful technology just floating around for us to collect." She gestured to the piles of Empire weapons and computer systems stacked around her. "We've learned so much from studying your equipment. Your energy weapons are fascinating, and your computer systems are really quite impressive. We never would have figured out how to build proper military shields if you hadn't been kind enough to provide us with samples." Admiral Vexhai felt his silver skin growing darker with each word. "Anyway," Captain Martinez continued cheerfully, "we should have our new fleet ready for deployment in about 2 weeks. I think you'll find our new ships much more challenging opponents than the old cargo haulers we've been using." She paused, and her smile became less friendly. "Oh, and Admiral? The next time you attack one of our convoys, you might want to make sure you actually destroy the ships completely. We've gotten really good at pretending to be dead." The transmission ended. Admiral Vexhai stared at the empty screen for a long moment, then activated his communication system to contact High Command. The Emperor needed to know that the humans weren't just fighting back anymore, they were learning to win. 6 months after Ambassador Elena Vasquez had stood in the Crystal Chamber and declared that humanity was already at war, High Admiral Zephyron found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting a meeting with a species the Empire had considered barely worth noticing. The Great Council Chamber had been rebuilt after a human research vessel had somehow bypassed all planetary defenses and detonated in the upper atmosphere. The new chamber was smaller, built deep underground, with significantly more security systems. The viewing galleries that had once held confident representatives from dozens of species were now half empty. Many of those species were no longer members of the Empire. The Admiral stood before the rebuilt speaking stone, his crystalline features bearing new scars from the day his own flagship had been attacked by what appeared to be a disabled human cargo ship. The ship had been broadcasting distress signals and requesting assistance when it suddenly revealed hidden weapons systems and nearly destroyed his bridge before he could escape. He had learned to be very careful around anything humans claimed was disabled. "Report," he commanded his intelligence officer. "Sir, the human response has evolved far beyond our initial projections. What began as desperate suicide attacks has become a coordinated campaign that's disrupting our operations across 17 sectors." The Admiral studied the tactical display showing the current state of Empire territory. Large portions of the map were now marked in red, indicating systems where Empire control had become questionable. "How many installations have we lost?" "Over 300, sir. But the direct attacks are no longer our primary concern." "Explain." "The humans have shifted tactics again. They're no longer just attacking our facilities. They're convincing our own member species to question their allegiance to the Empire." High Admiral Zephyron felt his glow dim. This was the development he had been dreading. The Empire's power came not just from its military might, but from the willing cooperation of hundreds of species who preferred imperial protection to independence. If that cooperation began to fracture, which species are wavering? The Korthak Collective has withdrawn from 3 border systems, claiming they need to reassess their security arrangements. The Vexmore Union is demanding renegotiation of their tribute agreements. The Altarians have officially protested our civilian targeting policies and are threatening to leave the Empire entirely. And the humans are behind this? They're not forcing anyone to leave, sir. They're just talking to them, asking questions, making them think about what Imperial membership really costs. The Admiral activated a communication recording that his intelligence division had intercepted. A human voice, calm and reasonable, filled the chamber. "We understand your concerns about leaving the Empire," the voice said. "Imperial protection is valuable, and we're not suggesting you should abandon it lightly. But we want you to ask yourself one question. If the Empire is willing to murder millions of innocent humans over mining rights to asteroids, what will they do when they decide they want something that belongs to you?" The recording ended. "They're not recruiting allies," the Admiral realized. "They're making enemies out of our allies." "Yes, sir, and it's working. Our intelligence suggests that at least 12 member species are secretly negotiating with human representatives about what they call alternative security arrangements." High Admiral Zephyrin turned toward the great windows that looked out over the capital city. Even here, at the heart of Imperial power, he could see the changes. Fewer alien ships in the sky, reduced tribute convoys arriving at the spaceports. The Empire was becoming smaller every day. What about their new fleet? The ships they've been building? That's problematic, sir. How problematic? They've learned from every engagement we've had with them. The new ships incorporate our own technology, but modified in ways we never considered. They're not trying to match our firepower or our speed. They're building ships designed specifically to fight us. The Admiral frowned. All ships are designed to fight someone. Not like this, sir. These ships are optimized for asymmetric warfare. They're built to be expendable, but effective, fast enough to reach our installations before we can respond, tough enough to survive long enough to complete their missions, and cheap enough that the humans can afford to lose dozens of them in every engagement. How cheap? Our analysts estimate they can build 10 of their new ships for the resources it costs us to build 1 cruiser. High Admiral Zephyrin felt something he had never experienced in his long military career. The fear of fighting an enemy that could afford to lose. The Empire's strategy had always been based on technological superiority and the assumption that other species valued their lives and ships too much to waste them in futile attacks. The humans had proven that assumption catastrophically wrong. "Sir," his communication officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human delegation. Ambassador Vasquez is requesting another meeting." The Admiral considered this. The last time they had granted the humans a diplomatic audience, it had been the beginning of the Empire's worst military disaster in 3 millennia. But perhaps it was time to hear what they had to say. "Very well. Inform the ambassador that we will meet with her delegation. Sir, she requests that the meeting be held on neutral ground. She suggests the trading station at Kepler 442. Neutral ground." The Admiral's glow brightened with indignation. "We are the Zephyrian Empire. There is no neutral ground. There is only Imperial territory and unclaimed space. She anticipated you might feel that way, sir. She said to tell you that Kepler 442 is currently controlled by the Altarian Republic, which withdrew from the Empire yesterday morning." The Admiral stood in shocked silence for several moments. The Altarians had been members of the Empire for over 800 years. They were one of the most stable and prosperous species in the Imperial system. They withdrew yesterday? Yes, sir. The human ambassador seems to be remarkably well informed about current political developments. 2 days later, High Admiral Zephyrin found himself sitting across from Ambassador Elena Vasquez in a simple meeting room aboard an Altarian trading station. The room was deliberately neutral, with no symbols of imperial power or human achievement. Just 2 beings talking across a plain metal table. "Thank you for meeting with me, Admiral," Ambassador Vasquez said. Her manner was polite, but she no longer seemed like the harmless elderly woman who had first addressed the Empire 6 months earlier. Now she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had watched an empire begin to crumble. "What do you want, human?" the Admiral asked. "To offer you a choice," she replied simply. The war between our species can continue until one of us is completely destroyed, or we can find a better way forward. You speak as if you have been winning this conflict. Haven't we? Ambassador Vasquez asked mildly. 6 months ago, the Empire controlled 437 star systems. How many do you control today? The Admiral's glow dimmed. The current count was 381, and dropping every week. What are you proposing? Peace. Recognition of human territorial sovereignty. Establishment of normal diplomatic relations between equals. And most importantly, an agreement that neither of our species will ever again use civilian populations as military targets. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. Admiral, Ambassador Vasquez said gently, with all due respect, you're not an empire anymore. You're a military alliance that's losing members every day because they're afraid of becoming the next new Geneva. She leaned forward across the table. We've proven that we can't be conquered by force. You've proven that we can't match your technology in direct combat. But we've also proven something else. We can make the cost of fighting us higher than any possible benefit. The Admiral studied the human woman's face, looking for deception or weakness. He found neither. And if we refuse your terms, then, in another 6 months, you'll be governing maybe 200 systems instead of 300, and the humans will still be here, still fighting, still convincing your former allies that Imperial protection isn't worth the risk of Imperial anger. High Admiral Zephyron sat in silence for a long time, considering his options. He thought about the Empire's grand history, its technological achievements, its 3,000 years of unquestioned dominance. Then he thought about cargo ships converted to missiles and civilians who chose death over surrender. What exactly are you offering? He finally asked. Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and for the first time since this war had begun, it was a genuinely warm expression. A chance to discover what humanity is like when we're not trying to kill you. The peace treaty was signed 3 weeks later. The Empire officially recognized human territorial rights and established formal diplomatic relations with the human coalition. Most importantly, both species agreed to a strict prohibition on targeting civilian populations during any future conflicts. The humans, for their part, agreed to stop converting cargo ships into guided missiles. It was considered a fair trade by most observers. Years later, xenoanthropologists would study the human-Zephyrian War as the perfect example of how a technologically inferior species could defeat a superior empire through sheer determination and creative thinking. But they missed the real lesson. The war had never been about military superiority or technological advancement. It had been about what the word home meant to a species that considered every member of their community worth dying to protect. The Empire had learned this lesson the hard way. There are some fights that cannot be won, not because the enemy is too strong, but because they care too much to lose.